Fear. It's something we all face from childhood. Monsters under the bed, the boogeyman in the closet, hell, even the darkness itself. But for me, it was something a little bit more exotic. The ninja. As odd as that may sound, you have to understand that this was the early 80s and my only exposure to ninjas came from the movies my older brother watched. And in those films, ninjas were silent, stone-cold killers. Swords, spikes to the face, and of course, the dreaded flying shuriken. So when Hasbro introduced a ninja into the G.I. Joe lineup, it didn't surprise me that he was a villain. What did surprise me though was just how much of a storm his arrival would cause and how deeply his shadow would fall across the world of G.I. Joe. See what I did there? For many hardcore G.I. Joe toy collectors, 1984 is seen as the year where Hasbro really spread their creative wings. Gone were the days of traditional green army men, and in their place were bright yellow and orange flamethrowers, face-muzzled dog handlers, ginormous machine gun-wielding body massage specialists, slightly stereotypical Native American trackers, black leather-clad femme fatales, and of course, rounding it all off, a mysterious ninja. If you ask me, I wouldn't say that my first impression of the ninja Storm Shadow was a pretty great one. I mean, next to all those other more colorful characters I mentioned previously, a white ninja looked rather plain. I'd even go as far as to say that he wasn't even the coolest new masked bad guy introduced that year. In my opinion, of course. I mean, don't get me wrong, seeing a ninja in G.I. Joe was cool. It's just that I guess I was a little bit biased when it came to ninjas in general. See, back then, my only real exposure to ninjas were the ones I saw in the movies that my older brother would watch. Sure, movies like Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, and American Ninja did feature ninja heroes, but what mostly got my attention were all the ninja baddies that they had to fight, and more specifically, the gruesome and often frightening ways that they would dispatch their enemies, and innocent victims alike. So, yeah, you could say I didn't really have a very positive view of those silent masked assassins. It may seem crazy, but as a kid, I had this irrational fear of ninjas dropping out of trees and slicing me in half, or worse, taking me down from afar with an arrow or a dreaded flying shuriken. Yeah, a wild imagination can definitely get the best of you. Anyway, that being said, it wasn't long before I quickly got over my ninja hang-ups and started to really appreciate Storm Shadow. I mean, how could you not? As it seemed that from the very start, he got quite the lion's share of the attention. All the later character development aside, the Storm Shadow toy itself is quite significant as I believe it was the very first ninja toy ever sold to children in the mainstream Western world. Like, not just in G.I. Joe, but from any toy line. And in G.I. Joe itself, Storm Shadow is also significant in that he was the first Asian character introduced into the line, a detail that would significantly affect his character in a big way later on. But before we get to that very intricately detailed version of Storm Shadow, I'd like to go over something a little bit more basic. Even if his animated debut came a few months after his comic introduction, I think that the cartoon version of Storm Shadow is a very good place to start because, for the most part, Storm Shadow was pretty much just one of the new bad guys introduced and featured in the second G.I. Joe miniseries, The Revenge of Cobra. His main scene came wherein he faced off with a mystical Native American tracker and fellow 84 wavemate, Spirit, and his buddy, the bald eagle, Freedom, in a battle to recover a piece of Destro's weather dominator inside a quickly flooding cave located in the ominously named Island of No Return. As the story goes, after beating each other up silly, the two evenly matched warriors come to the conclusion that their fighting would basically use up all the limited oxygen in the cave and they would eventually drown with the tides bringing in more water. So, they decide to contemplate on their situation and Spirit eventually figures out a way for both of them to safely escape. In the end, despite being a bad guy, this Storm Shadow does set himself apart by displaying a sort of sense of honor when he willingly hands over the Weather Dominator component to Spirit in gratitude for saving his life. Of course, he later on goes to infiltrate G.I. Joe headquarters to steal the said piece back. Those sneaky ninjas. Oh, and he does even things up later on by saving Spirit from getting crushed by falling ice. Another sort of Storm Shadow-centric episode worth mentioning is the episode titled Excalibur, wherein during an aerial battle, Storm Shadow's Cobra Rattler, yes, this ninja can apparently fly a plane, is shot down, okay, apparently not very well, and crashes into a lake, and sinks to the bottom where the ninja encounters a lady, standing watch over a sword. So, in case the title of the episode didn't give it away, Storm Shadow recovers the legendary sword of Excalibur, which, aside from being extremely sharp, like stone pillar slicing, like butter sharp, for some reason also emits lightsaber sounds when swung around. Anyway, as expected, Storm Shadow's possession of Excalibur causes a supernatural storm to ravage the countryside, causing torrential rains and floods. What is it with Storm Shadow and flooding? In the end, Storm Shadow is defeated by his Joe frenemy Spirit and the new Asian on the block, silent weapons expert Quick Kick, and Excalibur is taken away by the Eagle with adamantium talons, Freedom. Like, seriously, how does he grip that extremely sharp blade without slicing off his claws? And is returned safely back to the lake by the Eagle. And with Excalibur back in its rightful place, the sky is clear, and Storm Shadow cheap shots Quick Kick in the shin and runs away. So much for honor. Anyway, given these two stories, one constant element is Storm Shadow's rivalry with Spirit, which may seem a little out of place for more OG fans who know the Cobra Ninja's true rival and counterpart to be the G.I. Joe Commando turned ninja, Snake Eyes. But for some reason, Snake Eyes wasn't much of a lethal presence in general in the cartoon. I guess he was too busy working on his breakdance moves. Go ninja, go ninja, go! Anyway, so Storm Shadow had to make do with Spirit and Quick Kick, although it wasn't much of a rivalry since the two Joes pretty much came up on top almost every single time. What can I say? Apparently, Eagle trumps Shuriken. So with that out of the way, let's get into the real meat of Storm Shadow's story, the one told in the pages of the Marvel Comics. To start things off, as mentioned earlier, Storm Shadow was the first Asian character introduced into G.I. Joe, and him being a member of Cobra, a bad guy, didn't quite sit well with the third-generation Japanese-American writer Larry Hama. So almost immediately, he took it upon himself to weave an intricate character arc for Storm Shadow, making him into a more sympathetic character and explaining his unfortunate ties with Cobra and paving the way to the complete transformation of Storm Shadow into a good guy. In the comic, Storm Shadow makes his debut in the landmark issue number 21, where Storm Shadow races off to Destro's castle in the Balkans to present his captive, the G.I. Joe Scarlet, to Cobra Commander, and Snake Eyes goes off to rescue her. And it is where Snake Eyes first encounters and battles Storm Shadow. Poor red ninja dude. Anyway, another specific detail worth mentioning is that this issue is endearingly referred to by fans as the silent issue because the entire story is told through sequential imagery and nothing more. No words, speech balloons, or thought bubbles. While on the surface this would seem like a pretty gutsy move on the part of Hama and company, the truth is that they were under a strict deadline to complete the issue in 3 weeks, which at the time was unheard of, and so eliminating the words made meeting that deadline possible. Fortunately, this turned out to be the perfect way to introduce Storm Shadow into the series, as well as tie him in story-wise with Snake Eyes, when it was revealed that they both bore the same hexagonal tattoos on their arms, hinting at a shared past. A history that at the time, Hama had not even begun to conceptualize. But we didn't have to wait long, as 5 issues later we got the 2-part Origin of Snake Eyes, of which Storm Shadow plays a huge part. Turns out their story goes way back to the Vietnam War, where Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes were part of a long-range reconnaissance patrol unit, which also included the G.I. Joe Ranger, Stalker. Back then, Storm Shadow was known as the Japanese-American kid out of Fresno with an unpronounceable last name. So he was basically known as Tommy. He also stood apart because he carried a non-military issue bow and arrows that he was very, very, very good at using. And he always talked about his uncle's family business in Japan that he planned on joining and hinted at Snake Eyes that there was room for him too, if he was interested. So very early on, Tommy and the even then mysterious Snake Eyes forged a close bond, with Tommy actually ending up saving Snake's life when he was almost left for dead during an extraction. After the war, upon returning to the US, Snake Eyes finds out that his family, which includes his beloved twin sister, had tragically died in a car accident. Having no place to go, Snake Eyes takes up Tommy's invitation to join him in Japan, where we are introduced to Tommy's uncles, the soft and hard masters, along with a family business which turns out to be a ninja clan. So Snake Eyes is accepted into the Arashikage clan and trains alongside Tommy, and in many ways kind of excels past him skill-wise, which also adds a little tension between the two. Anyway, this rather formative period once again ends rather tragically when the Hard Master is mysteriously assassinated and killed with one of Tommy's arrows, and he is spotted running off and never seen again. Naturally, despite the Hard Master's insistence of Tommy's innocence with his dying breath, given the circumstances, he is obviously believed to be the culprit. In truth, Tommy actually caught a glimpse of the actual killer and went off in pursuit of him, and this led him straight into the arms of Cobra, where he worked his way into the inner circle of the terrorist organization, all the way up to being the personal bodyguard of Cobra Commander himself. I guess being an individual who can trace his family history through 30 generations of assassins, has an 8th degree black belt in several martial arts, and can endure unimaginable amounts of hardship and pain, as his toy file card states, does open doors for you. And it's at this point that Tommy officially takes up the mantle of Storm Shadow, which is actually the literal English translation of his ninja clan, with Arashi meaning storm and Kage meaning shadow. Eventually, the identity of the Hard Master's assassin is revealed to be the mercenary Zartan, hired by the Cobra saboteur Firefly, who in turn was hired by the future Cobra Commander to kill Snake Eyes, whom he wrongfully blamed for his brother's death. But he was actually the drunk driver who ended up crashing into Snake Eyes' family, killing them. Anyway, the Hard Master was accidentally killed by Zartan using a bow decked out with high-tech sonar instruments when he mistook him for Snake Eyes during a training session where he was imitating Snake Eyes' heartbeat. Man, don't you hate it when that happens? Phew, talk about one hell of a convoluted story. But all you need to know is that Zartan is the killer. And when Storm Shadow realizes this, he, along with Snake Eyes, storm Cobra Island, driven by a shadow of vengeance, in search of the mercenary assassin. Unfortunately, they are unable to find Zartan, who was accidentally shipped off to the G.I. Joe base after switching places with the Joe Ripcord. Another story for another time, or you could check out his video over here. And after fighting off a bunch of eels and sharks, and miraculously making it to shore, Storm Shadow is gunned down and seemingly killed by the Baroness. But Storm Shadow actually survives using an ancient ninja skill to fake his death and is brought into Dr. Mindbender's lab where he secretly recovers. But before Storm Shadow awakens, his DNA is actually extracted and used in the Doctor's little science experiment that would give rise to the new Cobra Emperor, Serpentor. Eventually though, Storm Shadow breaks free and reunites with Snake Eyes, and after a lot of soul searching, finally makes peace and officially joins the G.I. Joe team, complete with a brand new hooded and camouflaged action figure in 1988. Interestingly enough, he debuts his new look in the comics with another silent issue where he and fellow ninja Jinx battle Zartan and a whole bunch of red ninjas. While not as iconic as the original silent interlude, I still think it's a pretty good parallel. Eventually, Storm Shadow even gets to lead his own special crack team of G.I. Joe ninjas called Ninja Force, along with yet another new Ninja Force figure in 1992. Anyway, apart from a few stints back at Cobra thanks to some brainwashing, for all intents and purposes, Storm Shadow is now considered a good guy, or at the very least, an ally of G.I. Joe. Good job, Hama. And speaking of good jobs, if you think I'm doing one here covering Storm Shadow, please let me know by giving this video a like and share it with your friends. And if you haven't yet, please give my channel a sub, will ya? I will forever be thankful and in your debt. Like, if I had a Hydro Master component to hand over to you, I would. Oh, and let me know what you think of Storm Shadow. Are you a fan of the Cobra turned Joe Ninja? Is he better off as a bad guy or a real American hero? Let me know in the comments below and tell me your story. Anyway, given his popularity, it's no surprise that the Storm Shadow character is prominent in almost every other iteration of G.I. Joe through the years. And for the most part, he has been portrayed pretty consistently throughout, with a few minor tweaks here and there. Case in point, I give you the 2009 live-action movie, G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, and the sequel, Retaliation. Now, granted these movies have their faults, and I'm being extra generous with that statement. I'll give them credit for giving us a pretty decent version of Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, played by the Korean actor Lee Byung-hun and Ray Park respectively. The first movie gave us a fairly accurate origin story, with one of the early scenes showing a young Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes beating the shit out of each other. Great scene, I have to say. And Storm Shadow once again being blamed for the Hardmaster's death, leading to his joining Cobra. And the second movie reveals that Storm Shadow was actually tricked into joining Cobra, who arranged for the killing of the Hardmaster and framing of the young Storm Shadow, causing him to run away from his clan, straight into the loving arms of a mysterious old man, the real killer who turned out to be, dun dun dun, Zartan, who raised him up to be an assassin for Cobra. Once he learns the truth, he joins the good guys, although I don't really think that excuses him from unleashing a rocket laced with metal-munching nanomites on the Eiffel Tower, causing it to collapse and most likely crushing a good number of Parisians and tourists alike. But whatever, this Storm Shadow manages to avenge his uncle, taking out Zartan, now posing as the High Sparrow, the President of the United States, in a pretty cool "I'll take your bullet and slice it in half in the air and raise you my sword into your chest" showdown, killing the Master of Disguise. That being said, other depictions of Storm Shadow paint a different and sometimes less heroic and honorable version of the Ninja Master, or different motivations for joining Cobra, as in the later Snake Eyes Origins movie. Storm Shadow, going by his more fleshed out name of Tomisaburo Arashikage, is one of two heirs to the leadership of his ninja clan alongside his more devious cousin, Kenta Takamura. Man, what's up with all these promotional back or over-the-shoulder shots? Could it be symbolic of how the producers turned their backs on the G.I. Joe fandom by releasing this abomination of a movie? Sorry. So anyway, early on, Kenta is banished from the clan due to his attempt at killing Tommy. And in the present day, now a Yakuza boss, Kenta hires some pretty boy dude going by the name of Snake Eyes to do his dirty work. So yeah, long story short, Snake Eyes saves Tommy from Kenta's men and in gratitude is invited to join the Arashikage. But this turns out to be a ruse, cooked up by Kenta, who promises to deliver to Snake Eyes his father's killer. Snake Eyes is tasked with stealing this ancient Arashikage MacGuffin, some sort of gem called the Jewel of the Sun, and he initially betrays Tommy but eventually comes to his senses and sides with him, and together they defeat Kenta in a battle that destroys the Arashikage dojo and kills a whole lot of Arashikage ninjas. Tommy ends up using the solar gem against Kenta, which apparently is a big no-no for the clan, and gets banished from the clan because of it. On the flip side, all is forgiven with Snake Eyes, apparently. I guess it pays to be a crazy rich Asian. And so, robbed of his birthright, naturally a rightfully enraged Tommy vows to kill Snake Eyes when next they meet, and is recruited by Cobra and takes on the name Storm Shadow. Now obviously this movie sucked balls, but again, it is a unique take on the Storm Shadow Snake Eyes story, and I'll also give them this: even if they completely screwed the pooch on casting the actor Henry Golding as Snake Eyes, Andrew Koji as Storm Shadow is just perfect. This guy is awesome, and if you haven't yet, do check out his series called Warrior on Netflix. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Anyway, next up we have Storm Shadow from the 2010 series G.I. Joe Renegades, who is kind of a jerk to begin with. In the series, the Arashikage clan is portrayed as a band of ninja mercenaries, and a group that one day a young Storm Shadow hopes to take over. However, the current leader, the Hardmaster, is intent on changing the clan's direction after seeing the negative effect the mercenary lifestyle is having on his daughter, Storm Shadow's cousin, Kim, better known as the female Joe Ninja, Jinx. Also, inspired by his honor-bound ways, the Hardmaster intends to eventually pass the mantle of the Arashikage leadership to Snake Eyes, which further enrages Storm Shadow. So he attempts to kill Snake Eyes by poisoning his tea, but in the end unknowingly ends up killing the Hardmaster instead. Seeing Snake Eyes with his dying master, he naturally blames him, sending Snake Eyes off running for the hills with Jinx in tow, and he joins Cobra in order to hunt down Snake Eyes. Eventually, he realizes that he was the actual cause of his uncle's death and sort of makes peace with Snake Eyes and Jinx, or at the very least helps him battle an army of Cobra battle android troopers. That being said, slightly different origin story aside, I think this Storm Shadow will go down as one of the worst looking designs for the Cobra Ninja. I mean, seriously, I get the whole cartoon had its overly, extremely sharp angular style, but what's up with that exposed hair and the hood? I mean, he looks more like a short order cook at a diner than a ninja. Fortunately, his action figure had swap out parts to give him a more traditional looking Storm Shadow. And finally, on the extreme opposite end of the spectrum, I give you G.I. Joe Resolute Storm Shadow, who was pretty much a straight up evil dude. Like zero redeeming qualities. He kills the G.I. Joe bazooka at the very start of the series as a means to getting Snake Eyes' attention and challenging him to a final showdown to the death. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, Resolute Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are introduced as the top two students of the Hard Master. From the start, Storm Shadow is obsessed with learning the seventh and final technique of the 7 steps to the sun, which the Hard Master refuses to teach him due to him being, well, a bloodthirsty a-hole. And just to rub it in, the Hard Master shows him the move by shattering a flying log. Kudos to Storm Shadow for not even flinching as a huge chunk of that log goes flying by him. Sorry. And so in this iteration, this Storm Shadow hires Zartan to kill the Hard Master. So yeah, like I said, straight up whack. So back to the duel. Possibly the greatest Storm Shadow Snake Eyes fight ever made. And to be fair, if you ask me, Storm Shadow had to be a straight up evil dude, driven solely by pure hatred of Snake Eyes for a fight this brutal. Arms slashed, blades through the hand, crazy stuff. And of course, a duel this intense could only be resolved one way. Little did Storm Shadow know before his death, the Hard Master did teach the 7th move to Snake Eyes, which he ultimately uses to kill Storm Shadow to end the fight. Again, kudos to Storm Shadow's head for not shattering like that log, but he does die regardless. Or does he? Apparently, at the end of the DVD release of Resolute, the grave that Snake Eyes buried Storm Shadow in is shown to be empty. Anyway, as far as the figures go, as awesome as Resolute Snake Eyes looked, I can't really say the same for Storm Shadow, who, while not terrible, was still rather meh. And speaking of the toys, let's round things up with a few more notable ones of Storm Shadow that have been released through the years. First, of course, was the original vintage version of Storm Shadow, which, as I said earlier, looked rather plain. In fact, to drive home my point, it was notably reused and repainted into other generic ninjas. The Cobra Ninja Viper in 1992, and the Red Ninja Viper and Black Dragon Ninja in 2004. In 2007, as you may know, the G.I. Joe toy line was revived in a big way with the 25th anniversary line that was started off with a couple of box sets for both G.I. Joe and Cobra. And naturally, a newly designed and improved Storm Shadow was included in the Cobra set, alongside equally iconic baddies Cobra Commander, Destro, Baroness, and Cobra Soldier. And what followed that was a whole slew of modern versions of Storm Shadow, like, I kid you not, 30 of them. Basic Storm Shadow with red trimming, black version, a more ceremonial armor look, no mask, no shirt, no mask and shirt, hell, even one with a wind-up whirlwind kick gimmick. Hasbro gave it all, ending with possibly the best representations of the two most iconic looks of Storm Shadow, the Ultimate Cobra version released in 2013, and a good guy version sold together with his old cartoon nemesis Spirit in a classic Clash 2-pack to celebrate the 50th anniversary. Although, I just have to point this out, it didn't really make much sense to pair up this version of Stormy with Spirit, but whatever, great figure. And as always, bringing up the rear, we have the latest versions of Storm Shadow in the larger 6 to 7 inch scale. First up is the Super 7 Ultimates version of Storm Shadow, which, if you are a fan of the simpler, more one-dimensional take of the ninja from the cartoon, is perfect for ya. As with all the Ultimates releases, this very cartoon-accurate Storm Shadow comes with a whole lot of accessories including multiple hands and weapons like a sniper rifle. He also comes with an alternate underwater masked head which he used to retrieve Excalibur, which Super 7 was also nice enough to include, molded in a glow-in-the-dark plastic. Nice! And finally, we get to the current 6-inch classified line where we didn't just get one, not two, not three, but 4 versions of Storm Shadow. The first one is sort of a modern take on Storm Shadow, and by that I mean more detailed arm gauntlets and gloves. But if you're like me and are extremely picky with your ninjas, Hasbro eventually gave us a retro version with more traditional arm wraps and no gloves. They also gave us an Arctic Mission Storm Shadow, which is basically a modern take of his Ninja Force look. And last but not least, we got an update to the 1988 camouflaged Good Guy Storm Shadow, which some found a little bit too modern. But I don't know, I like the little red design elements Hasbro added to his look. It's a nice callback to the original figure's really red backpack. That being said, I guess when it comes to Storm Shadow in plastic form, given all the different versions we got, you definitely will not be left wanting. Quite fitting for such an iconic character who pretty much took the whole G.I. Joe universe by storm. And speaking of storms, do you recall a real-world storm which occurred in the desert in the 90s? I'm referring, of course, to Operation Desert Storm, wherein the United States led a campaign to liberate Kuwait from an Iraqi occupation. Well, did you know that the real-life person, Robert Remus, aka the professional wrestler turned G.I. Joe Sergeant Slaughter, actually made a controversial heel turn in the WWE from a patriotic soldier into an Iraqi sympathizer? Yikes. If you want to know more about this shocking development, I've got the Sarge's story here. Or if you want other G.I. Joe stories, I've got this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.